Hey guys, it's Lewis here. Welcome to a new video. And today we'll be talking about Scott Dixon's most underrated calculated move. It might not be a good underrated, it might be a bad underrated, but it's underrated nonetheless. So let's go back to 2007. Windows Vista was released, Madeline McCann went missing, the iPhone was released, Kimi Räikkönen won Ferrari's last World Drivers' Championship, the subprime mortgage crisis was starting to rear its head, and the final IndyCar season before the end of the car IRL split was taking place. For most of the season, it was a battle between Ganassi and Andretti. By the penultimate race in Detroit, Tony Kanaan had notched off 4 wins while teammate Franchitti had won 3, including the coveted Indy 500. Scott Dixon had been consistent as he always is, and he had just come off his 4th win this season at Sonoma. Dan Wheldon, Dixon's teammate, was having a very good season and was poised to challenge for the title until Watkins Glen, where he'd start to fall away. Going into Detroit, Dixon would lead Franchitti by only 4 points, with Kanaan a far 58 points behind Franchitti. Kanaan would have to be dominant the final 2 races and hope for his title rivals to have problems to have a chance to win the championship. IndyCar hadn't raced at Detroit since 2001, where Helio Castroneves won from pole, and ironically Dario finished behind him, with the super sub Roberto Moreno rounding out the podium. Helio would start from where he left off, and he'd take the pole ahead of Franchitti and Dixon. It was his 7th pole of the season. The other 6 he'd only converted to a race win once, which was St. Petersburg, his first. Helio would keep the lead from the pole position, and Dixon would be overtaken by Kanaan for 3rd. On lap 20, Franchitti, Kanaan, and Dixon would all pit together and they would remain in the same spots. Helio would be left out and stuck behind Dan Wheldon, which would unravel his race, and he wouldn't be at the front for basically the rest of the race. He would pit 5 laps later and come out in 4th, 15 seconds off of Franchitti, your new race leader. Andretti would have gearbox problems and would record his 9th DNF all season. He was running 5th. Ryan Hunter-Reay would also have a problem, which would put him out of contention, who he was also up there deep into the top 10. A caution would come out on lap 27, which would close Helio's massive gap, and they would shortly restart at the end of lap 30, where Sarah Fisher and Sam Horns Jr. would make contact at turn 1. Derek Manning would pit Danica Patrick, and Vitor Miro would have nowhere to go. It would all go back green on lap 38, and the order at the front would remain the same. Danica Patrick would bring out a 3rd caution on lap 47 and make contact with Scott Sharp, putting him into the wall. The top 4 would pit together under lap 49, under the caution, and Tony Kanaan would jump Franchitti for the lead on this strategy. Buddy Rice, Danica Patrick, and Dan Wheldon would stay out. It turns out that Kanaan didn't get all the fuel in his car due to a fuel plug issue, so he would have to pit sooner than everyone else. We would come back under caution after Ed Carpenter spun during a commercial break. Leader Buddy Rice would pit, and Tony Kanaan, along with Castroneves, would follow him in. Franchitti would now be in 3rd with Dixon in 4th. Kanaan and Castroneves are 7th and 8th. Dario would be stuck behind the Chip Ganassi of Dan Wheldon, while Kanaan would get past both Manning and Scheckter for 5th place. Wheldon would pit with 26 to go, unleashing Franchitti to go after his teammate. Danica would pit from the lead with 24 laps to go, and Helio would bring out another caution after trying to get past Thomas Scheckter for 4th place. He'd end up locking into turn 1 and take himself and Scheckter out. Kanaan would stay out based on the fact that it was close to being a time race, and Dixon, along with Franchitti, would pit. Dixon would beat Franchitti off pit road, and he'd restart 3rd, while Franchitti would restart 6th. They would start with 18 to go, and soon enough, Dixon would have Franchitti up his gearbox. Dixon would try to pass Buddy Rice for 2nd, and he would struggle to. Meanwhile, it would be turned into a time race, and Buddy Rice and Tony Kanaan, who are 2nd and 1st, would be close on fuel. It would reach a boiling point on lap 87, approaching the white flag. Dixon would try to lunge to overtake Buddy Rice. He'd overcook it and put Buddy Rice into the wall. It looked for a split second that Dixon would be unscathed, but he'd spin on the exit. Dixon, knowingly entering the race with a 4-point gap, that Franchitti would certainly take second place due to the caution coming out for this incident. Dixon finished 8th this race, and Franchitti would have netted 19 points over him, all but making his title challenge extremely harder, as they would leave Detroit with Franchitti having a 15-point gap going into the final race. Dixon would brake after spinning as usual, but instead of holding his brakes, he'd release them as Dario would try to pass him. Dario, being next to the wall, would have nowhere to go and get taken out by Scott Dixon. Michael Andretti, car owner for Dario Franchitti, vehemently believed that Dixon did it on purpose, while Franchitti would get refired and pushed off by the safety crew, netting him a 6th place finish. Dixon would finish 8th, and when it was all over, Dario would lead the championship by 3 points. Kanaan would win on a fuel strategy, which would be his 5th win, with Danica Patrick finishing 2nd and Dan Weldon rounding out the podium. Kanaan would be 39 points back, virtually out of the title fight. However, Franchitti would get the last lap of Chicagoland, as Dixon was leading the race, and because Franchitti was 2nd place, Dixon had a 7-point gap. On the final lap, going into turn 3, Dixon would run out of fuel, leaving the championship and the race win to Dario Franchitti. Now, I know this wasn't a history video, but if you enjoyed it, make sure to smash that like button for more, subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, hit the dislike button, tell me why in the comment section below. There will be an IndyCar history video next week, so stay tuned for that. I'll see you later.